Who am I? My name is Neil Wyler. In the information security community, I'm better known as Grifter. By day, I am the global lead of active threat assessments for IBM X-Force, or I have been for a couple of days. I just started with IBM X-Force in that role. For the last 6 years, I've been a principal threat hunter at RSA. By night, I run all the technical operations for the Black Hat security briefings. I'm one of the main organizers of DEF CON. I'm on the review boards for Black Hat and DEF CON. I've written some books. I speak all over the world. Yay, mommy's proud. Like I said, 90 minutes worth of content, so let's roll. So we're going to talk about hunting, right? So let's start out with what hunting is. And I've got a nice shiny definition here that just says hunting is proactively searching through data in order to detect threats which have evaded traditional security measures. And that's a great definition if you're explaining what hunting is to somebody who doesn't, understand what information security is, or you're just trying to kind of give them the blandest possible way of describing what you do. What hunting really is, though, is just doing IR without knowing that you're owned, right? We do a lot of the same things. It's investigatory, like we go in and check things out. We do a lot of the same processes. It's IR when you're not sure if an attacker is there. Sometimes it leads to finding an attacker. Sometimes it leads to hours of you just clicking around on stuff, and we'll get into that a little bit. Hunting itself is, it's important to point out, is human-driven. This is not a piece of software. This is someone with a set of skills that is going in and using those skills to try to detect an attacker persisting within the environment. Despite what you see on expo floors of places like RSA Conference or Black Hat, this is not something that you can just fire off a piece of software or put another box in your environment and just expect it to do it for you. Hunting requires people. It's proactive, not reactive, right? So we're deciding, I'm going to go look before we get some alert or incident that comes into our queue. So we're going to go look first and find out if somebody is there. It's better not to wait. When you're playing hide and seek, go seek. And it's iterative, right? It's not random. It should be a repeatable process, something that we're able to do over and over again. So if we find something that's interesting or a certain type of data that's interesting, what we want to be able to do is find that type of information again. That allows us to make our hunts repeatable, to document things, to hand those off to maybe junior hunters or other hunters that you can say like, hey, I found interesting stuff. It also means that maybe we create an automation playbook or another alert or something like that. Those are things that we can gain throughout our hunt. But let's talk about what threat hunting isn't, right? It's not hitting Control F and just putting in an IOC, right? We're not just going and looking for the next file hash or IP address, host name, that kind of thing. That's not hunting. That's just Googling, or I think we're supposed to say duck now, right? Right. Okay. Yeah. Ducking. So it's not automated. So again, despite what you see on the banners and the shiny displays and expo floors at security conferences everywhere, hunting is not automated. It is someone going through and doing a process or following a framework or just following a hunch. It's not something that you just go, do it, and it goes off and does that for you. There are aspects of hunting that can be automated. You can create reports, things like that, but hunting itself isn't automated. It's also not new. Hunting itself, or threat hunting as a term, is less than 10 years old. It sounds really cool and it's fun to put on a business card, but in reality, we've been doing these things in incident response forever, right? If you've ever taken a bunch of domains and dumped them into Excel or something and then stack counted them and been like, oh, this only shows up a couple of times across the whole organization, I'm gonna go take a look at what that is. That's threat hunting, so you have been doing this. It's also not wizardry, right? Having somebody who is a generalist who understands a lot of operating systems, a lot of protocols, different things that they can go and investigate about is fantastic. But even if you have a junior analyst or somebody who's new, all of us have a specific bias, right? There's some part of technology or part of security that we are better at than other parts. So take your junior analysts or your junior hunters and point them at that thing, right? If you have that like sadist within your organization who just loves DNS, like point them at DNS. It's usually DNS, right? So now it's always DNS. So why do we want to hunt? Well, We're hunting because we're looking for undetected threats. We're looking for the things that the blinky boxes and the shiny things we buy from vendors aren't finding. We want to find those undetected threats because it reduces the dwell time that attackers get to hang out within our environment. And that is the goal, right? We don't want to be that company who's on the news after a breach and they're like, and the evidence shows they were in there for 7 years, right? That's no thank you. You're also going to learn your environment better than you ever have before. And for me, I think this is the biggest hidden return on investment of hunting, is that you'll start to understand things like, why did we create our golden images this way? Why do we use these protocols? Why do we not use these protocols? Why did the network team configure thing like this or segment this like this? It helps you understand the way that your organization is structured, and when you have that understanding, it gives you a huge advantage over an attacker. And I can tell you, as somebody who lived on the red team side of the house for many years, that if an attacker gains access to your environment, the first thing that they're going to do is learn everything that they can about your environment. So you should do that first. It's also just going to help you improve your organizational posture overall. You're not always going to find exfiltration to China or some Russian organized crime group, right? And that's good. We don't want to find that. I'm going to go do a hunt today. Dear God, no. No. You want to go and do your hunts and do them repeatedly every day. Go out and try to find something interesting. You're not always going to find exfiltration to China, but what you will find are gaps in the way that your security is set up, misconfigurations that exist within the environment, and you'll find them before an attacker does, right? And what that means is you can go and fix those things before they become a problem, before they become a foothold or an enabler of compromise for your organization. So you're reducing your overall attack surface. And finally, why hunt? Well, it just makes your analysts better. It allows you to, instead of sitting there taking incident after incident out of a queue. I've been in that role before. It is soul crushing, right? You're just like, oh, let me make sure the mitigation worked. It did, and here are my notes, and good, right? Like, it allows you to take the knowledge that you gain from doing things like this, coming to a conference, reading all the books, the training classes that you've gone to, and decide what you're going to go look for. Decide what you think is the thing that is actually going to matter to the organization, and spend your time there. And when you do that, you do two things. One, you're focused on something that you care about, and two, it's just plain good for morale, right? So allow yourself to be the investigator you were told you were going to be when you got onto the blue team side of the house. Documentation, yay! Let's talk about documentation. Everybody's favorite topic. Honestly, you got to write stuff down. If you're not writing it down, it might as well not have happened. You want to do this for two reasons. One, it allows you to show management the value in the time that you're spending hunting. You can say, this is the reason that we spend this time doing this, is because I was able to find these gaps in our infrastructure, I was able to find these vulnerabilities, and that allows you more time, or to become a full-time hunter, or hire a full-time hunter, expand that hunting program. So what you're going to want to write down are things like gaps to identify, so gaps in logging, any vulnerabilities, issues that you came across, and how they were resolved. So as you find things and you escalate them up to different parts of IT or the organization, follow up with them, make sure that those gaps were closed. Otherwise, what was the point? So follow those things to resolution. The hypothesis that you came up with when you started to hunt. So if you said, what am I going to go hunt for today? And you're like, well, let me put myself in the attacker mindset. If it was me and I was going to attack our organization, how would I try to exfiltrate data from our environment? I'm going to go look there, right? Write down what you were hunting for. What gave you the idea to go look there, and what did you do? Right? You want to make sure that you are laying out how you spent that time. And of course, any new alerts that you come up with. So if you do find something, find a new indicator of compromise, find something that you can create a rule on, or an additional analytical path for your automation solution or something. Write those things down, and of course, anything you discover. Find a compromised host, find an attacker persisting in the environment, write it down. Again, two reasons for this. One, get more time to hunt. Hire another full-time employee to hunt, whatever it is. But also, because the end-of-year performance review is going to show up, and selfishly, you'll have a bunch of really cool stuff that you can put on there where you're like, I found this, I closed these gaps, I was able to detect these compromised hosts. Those are really good things for that end-of-year review. So good for the organization, good for you because you'll get additional help within your SOC and hopefully some more time to hunt or additional hunters, but also good to get that stellar raise every year, right? All right, so let's talk about the data. From a data set standpoint, we start out with logs, right? The gold standard for decades and the gold standard for decades to come, I'm sure. Logs, storage is cheap. Log everything. So I put on here, collect logs from key areas. Those key areas are everything. If it creates a log, log it, write it to disk. I don't necessarily mean put it in your SIM, right? Because that's expensive depending on which solution you bought, right? So, but I do mean keep the logs. Even if you don't look at your logs, and please look at your logs. But even if you don't look at your logs, if you experience a breach and you're able to have an IR team come in, and you should have an IR team come in, even if you have your own, if this is the whole, like, don't do your own defense, even if you're a lawyer type of thing, like, bring in a second set of eyes. So when another team comes in or an IR team comes in, they're able to look at all of that log data. They're going to love you. You're going to be in a much better situation. So if it creates a log, log it. Network side of the house. I love the network side of the house. I would just let PCAPs wash over me all day if I could. I know that makes me super weird, but I said everybody has their thing. For you, it's DNS. For you, you just like the minutia of different operating systems. For me, PCAPs. So on the network side of the house, all your network data, understand what your ingress and egress points are, right? So how does data flow into and flow out of your environment? Where is data leaving is important when you're trying to understand how an attacker is going to move the crown jewels out if they ever do get in. Understand your subnet roles, how your network is segmented. How do you carve things up, right? What can talk to what? Those are important things to understand. And a huge one is establishing directionality. Not everybody follows RFC 1918. There's a bunch of random IP addresses that are within organizations. What's important to you is that data flowing in? Is that data flowing out? Or is that lateral movement, right? Is that just something that's going on inside the network? If I go out on an engagement, usually the first half of the first day is spent just understanding that. How does data move around this organization? And then I spend the next several days just hunting. But I need to know how that data is flowing, because some things you might really care about if they're coming in, and some things you won't care at all, and vice versa. So, and then for me, full packet capture. I told you I love me some PCAPs. Full packet capture is huge. If you don't have full packet capture within your organization, go get it. Full packet capture is the, I don't know if I should be insulted by that ringtone that sounds like crickets, but I am. No. So full packet capture is essentially, at least to me, I liken full packet capture to video surveillance for your network, right? And we wouldn't build a building today and not put video surveillance on the building, right? Well, logs are great. Logs are you walking up and badging in the morning, and you get a log that says, Grifter showed up today at 9 a.m., and it's like, great, there he is, and that's the information you have. Oh, he badged into this other room, he came into the SOC. That kind of stuff. It's very limited. It tells you some things about what I did. But with full packet capture, it's the same as video surveillance, where it's like, is that actually Grifter? Yes, it is. Oh, he was carrying a box that had these things in it. When he came in, he left something from that box in this room and this room. Then he took things from those rooms, put them back in the box, and left the environment. With full packet capture, that means that I understand, oh, this person came into my environment with a box of tools. They put those tools here, they deployed that there. When they left, they took these files and they put that in the box and off they went, right? What I can do is actually pull the things out of the box, take a look at them, see what they got. And so when you have full packet capture and you're seeing tools being deployed in your organization or malware being deployed in your organization, and you can pull that tool or piece of malware out of the stream and throw it in a sandbox and see what makes it tick, that's huge, right? Or if you are unfortunately breached and somebody is exfiltrating data from your environment and you have full packet capture, you can pull the files out that they took. So you can say, oh, there's this RAR file over here full of weird stuff. Well, now I'm going to pull it out, throw it in a sandbox, open it up, and see what they actually took. And knowing what an attacker took during a breach is the difference between having to call a few people and ending up on the news, right? Legally, there are way different things that happen depending on what somebody takes from the environment. So if you have the ability to rebuild what was taken from you in a breach, that is invaluable. The organizations who don't do this and then experience a breach understand how valuable it is after the breach. That's normally when you will get the blank check, right? You're trying to get spend, you're trying to get additional headcount, can't get it, breached, let's go! Look at how many people we're hiring. Oh, we got this shiny thing. I don't even know what that box does, but it sure is pretty. Hopefully you don't have to get to that point. Get your full packet capture going and understand what's actually happening on your network. And then, of course, endpoint. Endpoint is where the rubber meets the road, right? What did they actually do on the host? And so make sure you're pulling all your inventorying all your processes, scheduled tasks, unexpected services. I know a lot of these things sound foundational, and they are. But the reality is the foundational stuff is where we find bad constantly. And this is across every organization. We're not talking about just mom and pop pizza place over here. We're talking Fortune 10. The foundational stuff is what finds the attackers, okay? They will not burn a 0 day if they don't have to. They will come at you and find the path of least resistance. And if that makes them successful, then great, they stop there. They will escalate to whatever level they need to get to if you're specifically targeted. But by and large, attackers will come at you with whatever will work and is the least amount of effort. So we find these things with foundational stuff, and it works. All right, so mindset-wise, threat hunting is really about situational awareness. It's about understanding what normal is like on your host or your network. It's about setting a baseline, understanding what the norms are, and diffing against it over and over and over again. So you can say, okay, this is what this should look like. So when something happens that is an outlier or some type of anomaly, it will jump out. It will stand out like a sore thumb. You'll be like, that ain't right. I don't understand why that's doing that. That's a bump in traffic over here. That's a weird behavior. That user never connects to that thing over there. So understand and set that baseline. It's important to note, though, that while outliers are always interesting, they're not always evil. You're not always going to find that Russian organized crime group, right? But sometimes you'll spend 4 to 6 hours just digging in on something that you're like, oh, what is this? What is this? What is this? And in the end, it's just how a certain protocol or operating system works within your environment, or it's just the way the communication takes place between different parts of your organization. But you still learn something. And if you can put yourself in that mindset that I don't care how this ends, but I'll learn something, then you will always enjoy the hunt. And I genuinely enjoy the hunt. It's also important to just leave your preconceived notions at the door. You don't want to start with an IOC. Again, what you want to start with is a hypothesis, a question. How is somebody going to come at me? This is where if you have any offensive background, red teaming, pen testing, whatever it is, putting yourself in that attacker mindset and saying, what would I do to us, is going to be valuable. So start out with a question. You want to know what you hope to find, and then go out and look for it. But don't be discouraged if you don't find it. You want to stay flexible. If you're in the middle of a hunt, you started with a hypothesis, and you're driving down the path to find out or prove out that hypothesis, and you, what I call, see something shiny, and it gets your attention. This is where you want to embrace the ADHD that is so prevalent within our industry. If you see something shiny, full stop. What's that? Why did that get my attention? Why did that stand out to me? These are the things that we want to look at, right? So if you're in the middle of that path and you're like, I can't get derailed, open another tab, and then see something shiny, open another tab, And your hunt's just not done until all those tabs are closed. That's it. So prepare to pivot. There's going to be a lot of them. And this one for me is huge. Find tools that help you make sense of the data. I don't care whether those are bought from a vendor. I don't care whether those are open source. If you're a university and you have a bunch of students, you can throw at managing some open source project so that your analysts can actually use it instead of managing it and using it, because who's got the time? Find the thing that works for you. It doesn't matter if you have the most expensive, shiniest dashboard, crazy whatever. Look at the pew, pew, pew. Great. If your analysts hate it, if your hunters hate it, who cares how much it costs? What you need to do is consult your team, decide what the tools are that you want to use, what are the things that are going to make you successful, and use those things. Doesn't matter if it's vendor-driven, doesn't matter if it's open source. Use the thing that your analysts want to use and size it appropriately. If it's slow, ain't nobody hunting in there. And then again, document everything and write it down. And please share it. Another thing in our industry that's pretty prevalent is our imposter syndrome. If you need to write a white paper, if you want to give a talk at a conference, if you just want to send out a tweet that says, this thing helped me, share it. If it helps one person, fantastic, but put the stuff that you're learning out there. Now, I talked about a hypothesis, a way to begin a hunt or decide how that hunt should start. And here's a good way to seed that hypothesis, right? So what you want to do is take a look at your business, your organization, and understand what it is that you actually do. What do we provide? Am I in entertainment? Am I in an energy sector? Am I financial, healthcare? Okay, for me, what are those applications and assets that are related to my industry that are the most risk for me? What are the things that are the scariest? What will put us on the news? Right? Understand that down to the application and asset level. And once you've done that, determine what the probable attack vectors are going to be to come at those assets. And then for each one of those, what are the potential techniques, right? What are the artifacts that are going to be left behind by those techniques? And for those artifacts, what are the tools that apply? And when I say what tools apply, again, two things. One, what are the tools that create those artifacts? What are the attackers using? And two, what are the tools that detect the artifacts that I'm looking for? And then document it. You can see a theme here, right? Document. Write it down. I know there's a lot of people out there who think like, oh, like tribal knowledge sucks. Like if you are in an organization, you're like, when I leave, everybody's going to be so sad because there's going to be a vacuum and I'm amazing or whatever. You suck as an employee and your team should hate you. There's no pizza party for you when you leave. Write it down. Yeah. No pizza for that guy. Like the guy who started clapping first is like, yeah, go to hell, Rob. So. And then when you've determined what those things are and what those probable attacks are, red team and blue team them if you can, right? And so what I mean here is emulate the most likely attackers that target your business, right? So if it's APT, whatever, that it comes at your energy sector business, if you can't defend against the most likely groups to target you, good luck, right? But if you can, you reduce your risk dramatically. And then just do it over and over again. Over and over again. Again, another theme. Do it again and again and again. A good place to go look for things like this, that those TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, threat intelligence that actually matters, right? The way that attackers conduct business. And in some cases, it is literally business. Understanding those TTPs will help you defend yourself for much longer than blocking an IP address, a host name, or triggering on a file hash somewhere. So the MITRE ATT&CK framework is a great place to go find that type of intelligence. Literally, you can click on things like, I'm in entertainment, and it's like, these APT groups hate you, or love you, depending on how good your defenses are. But the MITRE ATT&CK framework is great for that. If you don't spend time in MITRE ATT&CK, please spend more time there. It is fantastic. I am super nerdy, so sometimes I'll just go into MITRE ATT&CK and go down the wiki rabbit hole, and it's fun because I'm a giant nerd. Another thing is that using MITRE ATT&CK, you can build things like this, which is a nice stoplight type matrix where you can say, I have these data sources for these attack vectors and these techniques. this is the visibility I gain with the data sources that I have. So if we're looking at web shells, logs are okay, but full packet capture and endpoints are fantastic, and NetFlow is useless to me for web shells, right? And then go through your organization and decide, where am I covered? Then you can take this and deliver it up to management and say, here's where our gaps are. Here are the groups that target us, or most likely to target us. Here's their normal attack techniques. This is what they use to come at us, and we lack visibility in these areas. And so hopefully that allows you to go back to management and say, give me additional headcount, give me additional time to hunt. I need to buy the shiny thing I saw at Black Hat. Whatever it is, we need more training, we need this. It gives you the ammunition to hopefully get the things or the resources that you need to be successful as a defender. Another thing it does is that, let's say you are breached, and they're like, hey, they call in the CISO, and it's like, it's time, and time for what? Time to be the chief information scapegoat officer, you're fired, right? And you can be like, well, that breach happened this way, the attack was done this way, they used this technique. And if you remember back in June, I gave you this shiny stoplight type matrix that told you we had gaps in these areas, and all I needed was additional headcount or maybe this other product, but you didn't give it to me. I'm gonna go back to my desk. Good luck with that. And then you go back to your desk and you keep your job. So good to have stuff like this. Now I mentioned red teaming, and I wanna talk about it just real quick because there is a difference between offensive types of approaches. Not everything is just red teaming, or not everything is pen testing, right? So what are the differences? Well, a vulnerability scan is just a scan. It's a piece of software, we set it and we let it run and it pumps out a report, you put a logo on it, you charge the company $10,000. No, don't do that. Dear, please don't do that. But there are plenty of people out there doing that. This is not red teaming, this is hitting go on a piece of software. Pen testing is a skilled individual who goes in and says, okay, I'm going to go try to find vulnerabilities, and when I find them, I'm going to exploit those things. And once I've exploited that, I'm going to try to see how much further I can get, and I'm going to do this over and over and over again and see how many ways I can find to get into the organization, how many different things I can exploit. And hopefully when they're done, they give you a report that tells you, here's your gaps, close these up, and they come back in 3 months or 6 months, and hopefully you fix those things, and they just find new ways to crush your spirit. But it's a numbers game, right? Red teaming is a test of not just your technology, but also of your capability to do detection with your people, right? So a red team should come in with a specific goal. They want to get to a certain thing. They're going to come in with stealth and look to meet that goal by whatever means necessary, as long as the scope is correctly done. And they should be using threat intelligence to do that. They should come at you and say, here's the most likely way that you'll be attacked. We're going to emulate those things. We'll see if you can do those, and if you can, then we will adjust the next time we come in and do it, and we'll come at you in a different way. That is how a red team exercise should go. It should be a group of skilled individuals who are pulling no punches and coming at you, emulating how you will most likely be attacked. And that should gain you something. It shouldn't just be you getting punched in the face over and over again. I will say here, and this is just the gospel according to Grifter, findings should be shared from the red team to the blue team without any kind of discipline, and also without any kind of the nonsense, frankly, bullshit ego that seems to come along with being on the offensive side of the house. And again, I have been and am still contracted sometimes to be that red team person. So I get it. Like, it's like, I'm an elite hacker, pew, pew, pew. And you're like, shut up, Tom. Like, what you need is not, it shouldn't come across as, ha ha, we got you. It should be, we're working together to make sure that these things are closed, right? And so red teaming is a little bit different. I threw bug bounty programs in here, and I did that because I think that they're a good, it's a good way of getting some low-cost testing on different things, but it can be noisy, right? So you want to be able to know whether or not what you're seeing is just a bounty hunter looking for a bounty, or whether or not you have a legitimate threat. And sometimes this can muddy the waters. But I mean, someone might get a t-shirt, so that's dope. All right. We're going to talk about some practical hunting or things to go look for. I will say before I start that hunts are, you want to start out and build layers, right? There should be layers that make you go, oh, this is a problem. A lot of the things that I'm about to talk about are alertable. They're things that you can create alerts on, but some of them can be very, very noisy or loud alerts. If we were to just alert on every time a process was created, like forget it, shut us down, like we're done, right? So, but what you want to do is pair these things together. So if I'm looking at web traffic and I see that I'm getting traffic from a region I don't normally do business with, that it's a short user agent string and they're posting to the web server without ever doing a GET request, those things are now interesting because they're layered on top of each other. Maybe somebody with a short user agent string isn't something I care about, but when I have those other factors, I really start to care. So, like I said, we'll talk about a few things, and some of you will go, we already do that. Good. All right. So yeah, check your logs for process creation. Check your logs. Don't alert on process creation. That's insane. But check your logs for process creation. Do those processes match the names of your allowed software, right? Are those things being kicked off by executables that you actually know about and want to be there? If you have the ability, verify the file hashes to known good executables. Has something been changed? What am I looking at? And then for this is true of network as well as on the endpoint side of the house, but I look at a 24-hour window when I'm doing a hunt. And I do that because I need something digestible, right? So I'll look at the last 24 hours. If I see something interesting, something odd, something shiny, I will then drill down my investigation on that thing and then expand my window. So I'm like, oh, well, that was odd. Well, let's go look at that. Well, let's see how many times that's happened in the last 3 days, 7 days, 14 days. Or now I'm like, oh, that's on this specific host, or that was done by this specific user. Well, let's go see what that user has done for 3 days, 7 days, 14 days, a month, however much retention you've got. So hunt within a 24-hour window, look for something spooky, and then when you find that spooky, expand, right? It makes it just digestible. But you can look at a 24-hour window and look at processes that are executed once or twice across your entire organization. Like you're like, what is that? Why did these specific endpoints have this thing going on? We've all done this in some way when we look at the processes that are running on our machines at home and we kind of go, crap, what the hell is that? Oh no. And you go and duck it. Yes. So you go search for what is that process? Is this related to malware? I'm getting nervous. And then when you've done that and you've done a search, maybe you're still not satisfied, so you grab a hash, throw it in virus total, you're like, we still good? Or you're still nervous, you throw it in a sandbox and see what it does, right? So that's what you want to do across your organization. Look for the outliers. If I have 10,000 or 100,000 endpoints, but only 5 of them have this particular process running on them, what is that? Why do only 5 machines out of 10,000 running this thing? Just understand what's going on. And then you can always do like a report to deliver something like this. So you can say like, hey, I want a report every day that tells me the outlier processes that happen across the organization. And then you just like look at those things, check those out, hunt on those. What's happening there? Let me go expand the hunt, find out what's going on. Look at parent process relationships, right? So if command.exe is running from WinWord, what's going on there, man? Look for stuff like that, right? SVC host being launched by anything other than services.exe. Processes that are missing company name and product version, so lazy attackers who just aren't changing things. Again, this stuff sounds foundational because it is. Every bullet point in here is something we have found something on. And I'll share a story if I have even remotely a moment at the end of this, but I'm trying to power through. Look for processes with similar names to legitimate processes, and this is where things like string similarity algorithms are great, where you can go in and say, show me processes that look like actual known and good processes. Are they trying to change something like having a capital I instead of an L or a 0 instead of an O, that kind of stuff, right? Or just, you know, SRVC host or something like that, right? We want to find outliers like that. And then processes that are just starting from odd locations. Scripting, right? This should be something that when we start adding things to an allow list, we understand who our users and what departments are most often using scripting. If Kevin in accounting is suddenly doing a bunch of stuff in PowerShell, you're like, what's going on there, brother? What you doing, right? You want to understand who are the folks within the organization who normally are doing some type of scripting, and if something pops up, that's odd. We want to look at that outlier or anomalous behavior. If they're invoking encoded commands, what is it that they're trying to hide? It may be nothing. Maybe they just really like doing it. I don't know. But we want to look for things where people are not, you know, encrypting something, but just encoding something, obfuscating, or making it harder to see what's actually going on. And then again, just some advice, use a naming convention for your scripts, right? And then alert on things that go outside of that naming convention. Or don't, and just know that your hunters and analysts, when they're looking and they see a script that's been fired off somewhere, and they go, that's not normal. Putting small things into place, like just adding a naming convention to your scripts, can make a huge difference to what's normal and not normal within the org. Users being added to privileged groups. Know when IT does this, right? And if they don't have a schedule for doing it, please ask them to have one, right? If they're like, we only do that between these hours and these hours on these days. And then if something happens outside of those, that's an outlier, that's an anomaly. Go look. Why is that happening? Why is that taking place? And this one might seem odd, but collecting your bash history across the org to a central location, this one is just, if an attacker does get into the environment, watching them at a command line can give you an indication of how skilled that attacker is. I think we've all experienced this as well. When you're in a command line situation and someone walks up and is looking over your shoulder, and you're like, now I'm going to put 3,000 typos and forget all of the commands. And you're like, why are you judging me because I keep hitting question mark? Like stop. Like, I just want to be right. Right? So understanding what the skill of the attacker is, but also I can tell you from the offensive or red team side of the house or pen testing side of the house, going and looking at the bash history to see what a machine is used for is a good way to understand what you've gotten into. It goes beyond just who am I, right? Like going in and looking at what the last 50 commands that were executed on that box in the first time you get into it can give you a good indication about what takes place on that machine. So attackers are looking at the bash history, you should too. And then look for things that are signs of internal reconnaissance, right? So who am I? Just ipconfig, normal stuff. Again, this is stuff we do all the time because we're nerds and it's part of our jobs, but there's no scenario where somebody in, finance is should be messing around trying to figure out, what's going on the network or within their environment. And this holds true for tools like Nmap, anything you'd find in a Kali distro, right? So look for things that are normally run by IT or by admins, not run by your average everyday employee. When you're looking for lateral movement, so new user and endpoint pairs, so somebody logging into a machine they've never logged into before. Why is Kevin in accounting logging into a machine in research and development, right? That's odd. We want to pay attention to stuff like that. New endpoint to endpoint pairs. So why is that machine talking to this machine it's never talked to before? Again, outliers, anomalies, take a look at things like those. And then somebody logging into a system and then immediately using alternate credentials. Another thing that might be normal for us as administrators or within the IT organization, but not for normal users. And then, of course, to keep it gangster, any kind of log tampering, somebody going in and trying to corrupt or clear logs. When it comes to persistence, any changes to the registry, this is true for other things too, where like local admin privileges or whatever, somebody's able to make changes to the registry and they shouldn't. We have done audits of changes to the registry and found people who were put into the wrong groups or given the wrong privileges on devices or resources that they shouldn't have been. And again, it's not exfiltration to China, but it is reducing your attack surface because now you have one less administrator out there, right? Look for scheduled task creation, people changing, enabling or disabling tasks. What are those? Any unknown or unapproved services. And then the indicator, so nice, we put it in here twice, users being added to privileged groups, again, for persistence. So pay attention to things like that. Now this one may seem odd, but it is kind of interesting, and that is hints from your antivirus. Most people deploy antivirus and they just leave it, right? But what's interesting about your antivirus logs is understanding where malware is being cleaned from. So if malware lands in an average everyday user's download folder, is immediately found and cleaned, cool. If malware was cleaned off of a user's machine, but it was cleaned out of system 32, how'd that get there, right? Even if it was cleaned, how'd that get there, right? So pay attention to your antivirus logs. There's interesting stuff in there that can clue you in that there's a problem on that endpoint or with that user that you need to be aware of. That is odd behavior. So if you see something like that, what has happened over the last 3 days, 7 days? What is this user, what is this machine doing? And then signs of known attacker tools being cleaned out of anywhere. Doesn't matter. I don't care if it's the download folder or somewhere else. If you're seeing stuff like Mimikatz being cleaned off of something, why the hell was that there? Right? And if it did get cleaned off, great. But what does that mean after it's gone? Well, it means the attacker knows it got cleaned off, and so they're going to try to come at you a different way, or they'll just recompile something or whatever. So look for signs of any known attacker tools. And of course, any droppers as well, type of staging that might be going on. So look at your antivirus logs. There's interesting stuff in there. Artifacts in shim cache and am cache. I'm huge on this. If you are not hunting in your shim cache and am cache, you are missing interesting stuff. This is how you understand what all your applications are doing, where they're launching from. All of that information is in here. Please, if you're not hunting in your shim cache and am cache, change that, make that a thing. Look for renamed tools, somebody just changing the tools that they're using, or potentially command line arguments that are being executed by something that you would know is normal on a different tool. So you're like, that looks like port forwarding and PuTTY, but that's not PuTTY doing it. What is that, right? So look for things like that. On the HTTP side of the house, the web side of the house, I mentioned this earlier, posts with no gets. People don't often post things to your web server without asking for something first. So look for methods that are strange. Short file name scripts are things that are outside of your naming convention. Attackers can sometimes be lazy, and they'll just put in a very short or a single letter as the script or whatever that they're deploying. We find interesting stuff there. Encoded query strings, gone are mostly the days of just finding cat etc password in your address bar, but now it's just a blob of base 64. Why is there a blob of base 64 in there? Let me go take a look at what it is. And then low numbers of HTTP headers, right? So when you send a request, it sends a lot of stuff. It wants to know content length, the type that user agent string is, what browser you're using, and like operating system. How am I supposed to format this thing? What the person is asking for, what region they're coming from, what's the language I'm going to deliver this. All these different things are put into that request and response. If you're seeing 6 or less headers in there, that's weird. We normally see 8+, and sometimes an absurd number, right? Depending on what you're looking at. Every once in a while, you'll see something where it's like 2, and you're like, "What is that?" And it's like a Python script. But you know, because you go look, and you're like, "Oh, we're good." So just pay attention to stuff like that. On the host side of things, anomalies, direct to IP. Is that any more foundational? Could it get any more foundational than that? Direct to IP is not how we communicate to one another. We don't say, I found a super dope website at 64.228.14. Whatever. We don't do that, right? We give you a host name. And so direct to IP communication happens between machines or somebody who knows what's on the other side. What is that communication? Why is it happening? Create a feed of what those IP addresses are actually tied to and load that into your SIM or whatever tools that you're using to allow you to understand, oh, this is what this is whenever you see it. And specifying a port number. Again, we are all huge nerds here, so we do this all the time. And if you're running like a NAS at your house or a media server or something, you do this every day, right? You're specifying the port number But you know who's never done this? My dad, right? Kevin in finance, right? So if we see somebody doing, this specific port on this server, what's on the other end of that port? We want to understand that. Strange or missing refers. Are you seeing stuff coming from places where you don't normally work or sites that you have no connection to? If the content length is missing or mismatched, and we've seen this before where an attacker wrote a tool and they just put the content length was going to be 4096 every single time, and it wasn't. So that mismatch in the content length, we were like, that breaks the RFC. Let's go take a look at what it was. And it was just an attacker's tool. They'd custom written themselves. Old, strange, or short user agent strings. This is where you're looking for stuff like Mozilla with a 0. All right, if it says Mozilla 5, but it just says Mozilla 5, that ain't right. It should be really, really long. It tells you all the things they need, like the browser needs to do to display the page correctly. So look for user agent strings that are weird. Sometimes attackers, again, are super lazy, or it's just some kid in their parents' basement in Wyoming, and so they don't take the time to change the user agent string of the tool that was made to test environments, right? And they're using it to attack with. So if you see those things, you know they're bad every time. And if it's old, then maybe you just have old browsers kicking around your organization that need to be updated. You see like Netscape Navigator Gold or something. I heard my old people chuckle. Thanks, old people, you're not alone. All right, on DNS. Dynamic DNS, so still used by command and control a lot, right? We see malware that's communicating to dynamic DNS services, and the services have made this really easy for attackers because they've created APIs that allow them to basically do domain generation algorithms using these dynamic DNS services. Now, dynamic DNS is often used sometimes just for connecting to a file server or a media server or whatever. And so we find policy violation stuff in organizations all the time where we just have users connecting to some file server or media server at home. It's not a breach per se, but it's not allowed. So we want to look for stuff like that. But I mentioned DGA. So what this is essentially, it's kind of like having a two-factor authentication, like having a token where I have some seed data and you know that data too, and so we know that every 60 seconds this number is going to change. Well, in this case, it's just every X amount of time this domain's going to change. And when it changes, it's going to change to this. So that domain can change and change and change, and that host changes every time, and it doesn't matter because the command and control can still take place. They never lose communication from the malware to the C2 server because it's just rolling and rolling and rolling, which is why host names are terrible threat intelligence. DNS lookups to .onion addresses or browser processes that aren't Tor trying to connect to .onion addresses. I know this sounds odd, but this very well may be the first indicator that you get that somebody was hit with ransomware, is they don't know anything about it, and freaking Kevin in finance is trying to go to a .onion address, and because he doesn't understand that he's got to do it a certain way to pay whatever the ransom is. So sometimes, like if you see this, you should alert on immediately. And then as far as DNS tunneling, we look for a large number of subdomains. This is where an attacker is using really slow, basically, exfiltration. They're using a couple of bytes, and they send it out, and they change that subdomain. And they're basically encoding whatever it is they're trying to get out in that couple of bytes over and over and over again. They make the request, they rebuild on the other side, and now they get whatever it is they want. It's absurd as far as bandwidth-wise, but it works, especially if you don't detect it. A large number of a single subdomain, again, command and control. If we see somebody who just repeatedly is hitting a certain subdomain and it's only a couple of endpoints out of your entire organization, something you want to look at. A high volume of null or text records, more bandwidth for exfiltration, but we want to look for stuff like that. Or file transfer, just straight up file transfer over DNS. And now, you want to parse for file headers, but you also just want to be aware that this will sometimes trip on zone transfers or security vendors or antivirus vendors. So you'll see something that you'll say, okay, oh crap, look, there's a DNS tunnel. Somebody's trying to get files out over DNS. And then you go look and you're like, oh, it's Sophos, right? The thing about antivirus and security vendors is that they know about things like file transfer over DNS. So if they want to get something out of your organization, guess what they do? They use it, right? So, but look for stuff like that because it's not normal. When it comes to encrypted traffic, it's encrypted, right? So it's game over. We just get rid of it, right? Throw it away. No. Even if we're not saving the payload, the metadata involved in that is invaluable. So source and destination IPs, session size and length, there's things that we can infer from that encrypted traffic that having the metadata for it is really useful. We can use things like JA3, where we can get a higher confidence understanding of what the client-server communication is that's happening with that encrypted traffic. But honestly, we are at a point where we're seeing 50 plus, 60 plus, 70 plus, 80% encrypted traffic, not just like internal but external as well. At Black Hat, we track that as a stat, how much traffic is encrypted on the network. And for a long time, it went up about 5% year over year, and it seems to have plateaued between like 75 and 80%, and it just stays there. Encrypted is great, right? As far as we're all concerned, encrypt everything, right? But as a defender, it's really hard to defend when you don't know what's flying around your network. So it's good to maybe start looking at a decryption solution. And just a piece of advice from me, some security vendors will come at you and say, hey, we can do native decryption. Maybe they can. Maybe you check a box and now it starts doing that decryption. However, the impact to whatever that device is can be severe, right? So it's a good idea to just check and see, all right, is it worth it for me to go buy a standalone decryption solution, like go get some Gigamon solution that I can have rather than tell this vendor's device to start doing that decryption for me, and it ends up killing the performance and I have to buy 3 times as much. Now the vendor is gonna love that, but you're not. So just make sure that you understand what the impact is of doing that decryption and look at a standalone solution if you do. And with that, I made it. Yeah. All right, so I have a minute. I told you I would tell you a quick story about something that it seems really benign or not important at the beginning, but in the end led to something very interesting. And that was, if you came to the keynote yesterday, you met James Pope. So Pope and I worked together at RSA as threat hunters. We went out into an incredibly large financial organization. All of you know this organization. We went and sat in one of their sites, and there were 30 security people on the floor that we were on that site, right? So not like a small security team. Sometimes we would go in and meet with security teams and we'd be like, well, how many people are on your team? And we're in a conference room with like 4 people and they're like, this is it. And we're like, what? But in this case, that wasn't true. We had 30 plus folks on that floor. We sat down with a couple of people and said, here's what we're gonna be doing, this, and this. They said, all right, this guy's gonna sit next to you, to see what you guys are doing. And we started describing hunting to him and the process we go through and the way that we do our hunts. And we were looking at all of their network traffic, and we said, well, what we'll do is go in and look at a low number of sessions, because those are outlier sessions, and we want to see what it is that's behind that. So we're like, so for instance, I'm like, why don't we take a look at FTP? And he goes, we don't use FTP. And I was like, well, I assure you that you do, because I can see it on the wire. Like, it's here in the full packet. And he's like, no, we don't allow FTP. And I'm like, well, then this is a perfect place to look, because if you're saying that you don't allow it, this is good. This is 5 minutes into us sitting down with this guy just talking about the hunt. So we're like, well, let's take a look. And we open it up and we look and we're like, okay, every day at 1 a.m., there is a file transfer to an FTP server in Russia. And they're not even trying to hide a straight up .ru. And we're like, is this normal? And he's like, nope. And we're like, well, what do you think that is? And I'm like, I'm not opening it because I'm contracted to be here, so I'm not opening that. And he's like, all right, well, I'll do it. So we pull the file out of the stream. It's a zip file. We open it up, and he starts to open up the file, and he freaks out, and he closes it. And he goes, oh, shit. And we're like, what? And he's like, you didn't see that. And I was like, all right, just out of curiosity, what did I not see? And he's like, that is every financial transaction and trade that we've made in the last 24 hours. And I was like, cool. Let me just see how long that's been going on. 6 months of logs. 6 months, every 24 hours. FTP to Russia, not even trying to hide. 30 security people on that floor. But it's FTP, we don't use it, so we don't look. Go look, because it's the things you think you're not using that are going to bite you. Thanks.